Allison here, the bored housewife. I'm super excited that you're joining me for this episode today. I get asked quite a bit, like, do you have any stories of famous people or whatever, from working, like, from people that know that I've worked in the film industry. And although that I do, for one, I'm not sure if I've signed any NDAs. Because, when you're, like, getting hired, you just sign all this, like, different paperwork. And then, two, also, I want to maintain professionalism. I don't want to tell secrets or stories of people that would be unflattering if they were having just a bad day. Because we all have bad days at work, right? Overall, everyone that I've ever worked with has been pretty normal and pretty okay. It's, like, as far as celebrity-wise go. I don't have any like crazy horror stories by any means. So I'm gonna leave that and not share that information because I might want to go back into the film industry or get an opportunity to go back into the film industry, and I don't want people to see this and be like, "Hey, thanks, bitch," So, anyways, but I do have some encounters with celebrities, with some famous people from the time that I lived in New York. It's weird because, like, living in New York, I saw way more famous people than I did in California and when I lived in LA. And I don't know what that is. But anyways, it's specifically at this one restaurant I worked at on the Upper West Side called Cafe Storico. So I'm going to share some of those fun stories, pretty stupid stories on my part because I'm dumb. So, but anyways, guys, sit back and relax. Grab your beverage of choice and cheers, guys. Let's have some fun. All right, guys, first things first, let's get to the cocktail of the hour. So I have here an orange bourbon smash. Hello, orange bourbon smash. This is the first time I've ever tried this drink. It is extremely refreshing. It kind of tastes like an old-fashioned, actually. And it is made of, the recipe called for 1.5 ounces of bourbon. I did 3 ounces of bourbon, half an ounce of triple sec, half an ounce of sweet vermouth, a few dashes of bitters. You want to muddle some a mandarin orange at the bottom of your shaker. Give it a good shake and pour it over ice. It suggested crushed ice, which mine is sweating. It suggested crushed ice, which I think would be really cool. Look really nice. I didn't have crushed ice, so I just used regular ice cubes. But and if you wanted to make this a virgin, you could definitely muddle some oranges. Maybe, I think they actually make, and you guys will have to look into this, or I can look into it too. I think they make non-alcoholic triple sec, so you get that flavor without the alcohol. So that would be kind of good. And then as far as like maybe some seltzer or something, I have a hard time figuring out the virgin drinks because I don't like them. And I haven't been in a situation where I'd have to drink them. Not yet anyways. So anyways, we'll work on it, guys, together. So cheers. Let's get to it. Okay, so I first wanted to give you a background of this place that I worked at. So paint you a picture, okay? So the place is called Cafe Storico. It's owned, I think it's still there. It's owned by Steven Star Restaurants. They're this really awesome restaurant group that started in Philly and then branched out into New York. So one of the bigger restaurants that some of you might have heard of is Budokan. It's like an Asian fusion restaurant. And it was featured in the film Sex and the City. It's where Carrie and Big have their huge fancy rehearsal dinner for reference. But anyway, so at the time, I think when Cafe Storica opened, they just had a few restaurants. But since then, I think that they have a ton now. They've really blown up. Great food, great people to work for. So nothing bad to say about that. The restaurant was on the Upper West Side in a museum. And this museum was the New York Historical Society Museum. They did a huge renovation and they wanted a restaurant in the museum as part of the restoration or renovation, whatever you want to call it. And next door to them was the Museum of Natural History. So this museum is on Central Park West, overlooking Central Park. It was incredible. Like, it was so pretty. There was this giant picture window that looked out onto the Natural History Museum and Central Park. And there were days people would make fun of me working there. They'd be like, what are you thinking about when you're standing up there? Because where the Hostess stand was, I would just kind of stand there and I kind of was able to like overlook the restaurant. But then like if we were slow or not busy, I would just like stare out this window and like picture like my perfect life. And I don't know. It just was, I'm very romantic. But yeah, it was cool. And then the restaurant itself, it had these like extremely tall ceilings and it was all white within these like pops of yellow. And then there was a bar and then towards the back was a kitchen and they did an open concept kitchen. So they had like, you could watch them make the food basically, and they had bar seating up next to the kitchen so you could sit there and eat and watch the cooks and stuff, which really cool concept on surface level. But this restaurant is inside a museum where a bunch of old people go, and you have a bunch of old, cranky, crotchety Upper West Siders, okay? That's the best way to describe them. And some of them, I think, in that area before, or there was something there before that was like cafeteria style. And so people would come in not understanding or realizing, and they would see the kitchen back there and they thought that they could like just go and order their food. And it's just like, you guys don't see this? Or like people would come in all the time with their sack lunches and they would try to sit down with their like sack lunches, and we're like, no, sorry, we're an operating restaurant. I go on and on about the place. The people I worked with, the company, the place, the setting, all that was so amazing. Like, I remember during Thanksgiving, they blow up the Macy's Day Parade balloons. And so we were literally like working that day and just watching them like blowing up balloons outside as we were like working. It was just the coolest thing ever because it's hard, like, it's hard to do that, to get that. So anyways, and I love the parade. That's one of my favorite things ever. So anyways, yeah, like the people that would go there were just very entitled, old money, mean. I cried several times from people just not getting their way or not getting the exact answer that they wanted and then taking it out on poor little me, because life is that hard for them, I guess. I don't know. I'll tell you a few stories. Well, we had this one family that was a regular. And there was like certain seats in the restaurant that people like preferred over others. And she had this one corner seat or table. And she called me up, and usually they were really good about making reservations, requesting that table. Okay, we can accommodate you. Well, she calls me up frantic. And I don't know if like people came into town or what her deal was, but like she needed a reservation and she needed that table. And we literally, when she called, I mean, she told me they were going to be there in about an hour or so. She was like, I need that table, and like we're coming in an hour and I need that table. And we literally just sat that table. And so I was like, I definitely have a table available for you, but we just sat that table, so, it might not be the table that you want. And she started like screaming at me on the phone. We come here every week and eat your food. Like, if we want that table. And I was just like, whoa, okay. So I was just like, okay, ma'am, like, we'll figure it out when you, like, if you're coming, like, we'll figure it out, whatever. Hang out with her. I tell my manager. And my manager usually did a really awesome job about, like, going above and beyond trying to figure out these scenarios for people, right? But she was like, well, I guess we'll see when they get here, because you're not going to tell somebody that is sitting there and eating, oh, sorry, our regulars are here. Can you please get up and move to another table? Like, what did she think we were going to do? So I was like so pissed, and I think I ended up getting cut before they showed up, but I asked the next day. And unfortunately, that table actually were pretty quick, and they got up and out of there before, like, as this family was coming in. So she got her way. I was like, whatever, that's annoying. But yeah, and then there was another time, this itty bitty old lady, she had to be in like her mid 80s, late 80s, she was really old, comes in, weren't even open yet, and how the host stand was set up, it was like built into the wall, and we had like two entrances. One came like right next to me, and then the other came from like this other side. And people would be confused all the time, because most restaurants you go to, there's a hostess stand right there at the front, at the entrance that you come in, and that's how you do it, right? This place wasn't like that. So people would just walk right by, and I'd have to like run after them and be like, hey guys, wait up, you know? But yeah, so this particular day, we weren't even open yet. But the door was unlocked because the kitchen was bringing stuff in from the prep area. And so she comes walking in, and I was like looking over the books. So like I didn't think anything of hearing the door open because the kitchen guys were coming in. So I happened to turn around, and she's almost in the kitchen. So I was like, oh shit. So I like run after her, and I'm like, ma'am, like, can I please help you? And I was like, that's our kitchen, you know, and I'm like trying to like, there's nobody in the restaurant. Like, it's just her and me. Like, not even the kitchen guys were there. So finally I had to tap her on the shoulder, and she turns around, and she was like, what is this place? And I'm like, this Cafe Storico, we do, she's like, what do you serve here? I was like, well, you know what? Let me get you a menu real quick. Doesn't follow me, just stands there in the middle of the room. Okay. I run and get her a menu, and I bring it back, and they're big menus. They were like, maybe they weren't huge, but they were like, good sized menu. And so I'm like, she's like looking it over, and she's like, can't I just get a muffin? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. We actually don't have muffins here. We did have a few other pastries, though, surprisingly, on the menu. It was an Italian restaurant. But during the lunch hour, we would have and on the weekends for brunch, we did have a few kind of breakfasty things. So we had these little things called bombolonis. They're like Italian donuts. They were so cute. And then we had this other thing that was like a croissant. So anyways, I was getting ready to show her what else we had. And she was like, and so I had said no, though we don't have a muffin. And before I could even continue, she was like, ugh! And she threw the menu in my face. And it bounced off my face and fell to the floor because I wasn't expecting it. And she just walks off, mumbling shit under her breath. And I just stood and looked around. And I was like, did anybody just see that? Rude! Who fucking does that? That is the rudest thing. I think that, I don't know. Right now, off the top of my head, that's the rudest thing that's ever happened to me. Who treats somebody like that? Wow, your life must be miserable that you are that upset that we don't have a muffin on the menu. Goddamn, lady. Anyways, so these were the type of people that would come in all the time. Surprisingly, none of the celebrities I encountered were even close to those people, okay? These people were impatient, entitled, old money, mean, cheap. They had money, but they didn't spend it. Well, maybe they did, but anyways. Okay, so I have a few stories that are longer stories, and they're funny, that I'm going to share. I'm just going to quick tell you some of the people that I saw in there that I didn't really have any encounters with. So I'm a huge Frasier fan. Over random, right? I love that show. It's really funny. I don't know if you guys have watched it recently, but the jokes in that show are so on point. Like, it just cracks me up. So the brother Niles in that television show, David Hyde Pierce, he ate at the restaurant one night. We had Fran Drescher came in. She had actually kind of a bigger party, and she was so lovely. She was just the nicest ever. And she played the nanny, if you guys remember that show. And her voice was not like that, so I was a little disappointed, but she was so nice. We had, who else did I write down? Oh, so because we were connected to the museum, sometimes people didn't necessarily come in, but I would like see them randomly walk by, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I saw Tina Fey one time. She walked by with her daughter. And then also Stanley Tucci. You guys should look him up. He's in like every movie. He's in so many movies. But I love him. He's like one of my favorite actors. And he like walked in, and we weren't like busy at the time, and he was like, again, the restaurant might have been empty. I had like a lot of weird scenarios with the empty restaurant. But he was like, can I get a bottle? Like, can I get some water? And I was like, I can get you a glass of water, but we don't sell bottled water here. And he was like, oh, okay. He's like, well, no, you don't need to do that. And so he's like, do you know where I can get some? So I told him you can get it in the gift shop next door. I don't know if you could or not. So sorry, Stanley Tucci, if you didn't get any water that day. But then also the two Spocks came in, which that meant absolutely nothing to me. I don't watch Star Trek, but if you guys do, Leonard Nimoy, is that how you say his name? Sorry, I told you I'm not a fan of that show. But Leonard Nimoy, right before he died, with I think it was Zachary Quinto. That's how you say his name. Everyone was freaking out because he was starring in like the newest Star Trek movie at the time. But I do remember it was right before he died. Like, I think he died a few months later, Leonard Nimoy. But the two Spocks had lunch together. So that was kind of cool, even though I don't follow that show. But everyone at the restaurant was geeking out. So I was like, wow, this is important. So one of the first stories that I have, we had just opened, and John Lithgow was there. He plays in a lot of different things. Like, he played Winston Churchill most recently in that one movie. Was it called Churchill? Might have been about him. But he's been around forever. He was in that weird show, Third Rock from the Sun. He played Barney's dad in How I Met Your Mother. If you don't know who he is, I'm trying to think of like roles that he's been in. Very, very famous, been around a long time, incredible actor. He is a great actor. So he was eating at the restaurant one night, and we had these like hooks around the restaurant. So during like, if someone had a jacket or coat or whatever, we could hang their coats up there. There was also a coat check inside the museum. So if our coat hangers got over full or like an overflow of coats, then we could always use the coat check inside the museum too, which is notable because it comes back into one of my other stories. Sorry, I'm like, how am I saying this? Anyways, so if I remember correctly, he just had it hanging up on one of the hooks on the wall. So I see they're getting up to go, and he's like, to me in this story, when I remember it, he's like 7 feet tall. He's not that tall, but actually for an actor, he is really tall. He's definitely 6'3", 6'4", something like that. My husband is 6'4", so I want to say he's probably in that like same category. But in this story, he's like 7'5". It's just like a giant in this story. So he had this like really long, winter coat, and so when we hung it up on the coat hook for him, when you take off your coat in the wintertime and you have a scarf, around, it kind of all sticks together. So I take his coat off and I go to hand it to him like this. And it's not an entitled thing, me telling you the story. It was just an awkward moment. I was caught off guard because I thought he would just take it out of my hands. But he took it as I was going to help him put his coat on. Which, okay. So I was caught off guard, so I fumble a little bit as he starts sticking his hand in his coat. He was like, oh, why, thank you, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to help John Lithgow put his coat on. Great. So one of my friends, when I was telling her the story, she's like, well, he's probably used to being, like, handled that way from, like, the movies and stuff, like getting the costume department and all that. And I was like, that's actually a really good point. He probably didn't think anything of it. But anyways, so he's standing there having a conversation as he's getting his coat on. Well, as he like gets in his other arm, his scarf falls off his shoulder. So the scarf is only barely hanging on by one shoulder. So I'm like standing there holding it. His back is to me, and my manager, who had like opened the restaurant, he's looking at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like standing there like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, do I take it off of him and like hand it to him? Do I risk it falling off? And then it falls on the ground and he loses his scarf? Like, what do you do, right? So I just take this scarf and I just go, I threw it over his shoulder. And my manager is like, and I was like, I don't know, I panicked. And so then John Lithgow's like, oh, okay, and he didn't even notice. And then they leave. And my manager was like smooth, real smooth. And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't ready for him to because I would help women put on their coats and stuff. Like, I'm just not used to a man. Like, most men take their coats, So I wasn't holding it properly to make sure everything got on. So that's my silly John Lithgow story. All right, so I'm going to connect these next two stories together. One is because they're both very similar. So one is Angelica Houston and the other one is Matt Dillon. Matt Dillon has a second part. So we're going to start with the first part of both of these stories. So I'm dumb and I'm like not amazing with celebrity names. So like my one friend, she knows everybody. She knows like the little B-list nothing, C-list nothing actors coming up. Like she knows every name of every actor in every movie. And I'm just like, I have no idea who you're talking about. And then I look him up and I'm like, oh yeah, that guy. Or, oh, so-and-so in that movie. Like I'll be like, when I try to describe people, I'm like, the guy who plays in the movie and he's that guy, And so that's how I remember. I don't remember their real names because I don't think I care that much unless like, I think they're incredible and they're amazing, or if I've like met them or something, then I might know. So, and then especially when I have to defend myself. That's why I'm starting the story out this way, because you're gonna be like, wow, you're so dumb. So especially when you're in the real world, like just you're not talking about Hollywood or celebrities or stuff like that. Like when somebody calls and says their name, you're just kind of like, okay, because you're in work mode, right? So I would get calls all the time to make reservations. Okay, sure, how do you spell that, or can I get a phone number, email address, all the stuff, So, okay, cool. So Angelica Houston's assistant calls and wants to make a reservation. Okay, no problem. So I'm getting the reservation started, and if you live in New York, or if you're familiar with New York at all, there is a street in New York spelled like Houston, as in the capital, or I don't know, is Houston the capital of Texas? No, Austin is. Okay. Sorry. Um, Houston is a city in Texas that is spelled Houston. There is a street in New York that's spelled the same exact way, but we call it Houston Street. I don't know why. That's what we do. So I'm a little New Yorker, brand new to the city. I haven't spent, well, not brand new. I'd been living there for a while, but I'm very familiar with Houston Street. I'm not super familiar with Houston, Texas. Have never been there. Don't really care about it at this point in my life, so whatever, right? It's not on my radar. So when Angelica Houston's assistant calls me, first of all, do not recognize the name at all, not ringing a bell, don't care about that at all, right? Most people would be like, oh, Angelica Houston, the actress? And her assistant would have been like, yes. And that's what she wanted to happen. But no, I was like, okay. And I was like, because we got, like I said, we had some really rich people that would go to this place, and their assistants they're just like, this guy, a stockbroker, this lady, a lawyer, or whoever it is, they have assistants that would call and make their appointments and their reservations for them all the time. So again, in my defense, it's not like only celebrities have assistants, okay? There are other rich people in the world that also have assistants, and they make reservations too. Anyways, so Angelica Houston's assistant calls, and I'm like, is it spelled like Houston, or is it spelled like Houston, like the street? And she just says to me, it's spelled like Houston, like Angelica Houston, the actress. I was like, well, okay. So I guessed it was spelled the same way. I'm still not. I'm like, wow, this lady really thinks highly of herself, So I'm like, all right, we got your reservation down. We'll see her this day, whatever. And her assistant was so annoyed with me. She was just like, how do you not know who Angelica Houston is? Or, yeah, Houston. I'm like, wait, did I say it right? Who Angelica Houston is, you dumbass. So I get off the phone, and I'm standing there for a second, and I cannot figure out who the hell she is. And so my manager comes up, and she's like, what's going on? And I was like, well, I guess some actress, Angelica Houston's assistant, just called to make a reservation here. And, I just can't figure out who she is. And she was like, Angelica Houston? And I was like, yeah, who is that? And she just starts rambling off all of these roles. And I was like, oh my God. I didn't know her name. And she was like, oh, that's so cool. She's going to eat her, And I was like, yeah, well, her assistant did not like me. I told her the story, and she was like, oh my God. So you think, Allison, learn your lesson, But again, I'm just not very familiar with names. And this one is, so Matt Dillon's assistant calls. And now I should have known a little bit better because if you guys, and most people know Matt Dillon, he is super famous. And he is like in, I think You, Me, and Dupree, and The Outsiders. I don't know. You guys know. He's in so many movies. Anyways, if you don't know, look him up. You'll be like, oh yeah, that guy. So I had heard because if it was like a weeknight and it wasn't super busy, the managers would usually cut me around like 8:30, 9 o'clock to go home, because we just like no need for extra people there, right? So we did our last seating at 10 o'clock. So if you walked in the door at 10 o'clock, you would get seated and served food, okay? So I guess Matt Dillon liked to go in like later in the evenings, like close to 10 is when he would like to come in. So, and like if you made a reservation for 10 p.m., we would stay there until 10:15 for you. So just to give you a reference. So I'd heard he'd been coming in there and eating, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I would love to see him sometime. But it didn't register, so his assistant calls, and she was lovely. She was so nice. Matt Dillon, I don't know if you still have this assistant. This would have been in like 2012, 2013 time frame. She was lovely. But I'm stupid and it's not clicking and I'm in work mode. So I get the call and she's like, I think she wanted to make the reservation for like the next night. And so she's like, hi, I'm Matt Dillon's assistant and I would like to make a reservation. And so I was like, okay, sure. So I pull up the book and I'm looking and I was like, what time would you like? And she's like, what's the latest that you guys do for seating for dinner? And I said, the latest we do is 10 o'clock. So, she's like, okay. And she's like, can I call you right back? Because I'm going to ask him to make sure that's okay. So I'm like, sure. So she calls me back and she's like, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that because, okay, let me start over. So she called and I was like, yes, we do 10 o'clock reservations. So she was like, all right, yeah, let's go ahead and put him down for that, whatever. So this is the part that I say to her. I said, okay, just please let Mr. Dillon know that is our last seating and we will only hold the table for 15 minutes. So if he is not here by 10:15, we cannot seat him. Which, in all honesty, you shouldn't treat celebrities any different than normal people anyways. But he was becoming a regular, not like if he had made the reservation for 10 o'clock and it was 10:20 and he showed up, they would have honored it. Like it was, but they probably would have done that for most people anyways. So I'm just like, especially if you called and was like, hey, I'm running late, So I'm just like so serious with this lady though, because I care about my kitchen crew and the servers and all that. Like, you should be on time for your reservations, guys, right? So anyways, I'm like, yes, we can do that, but please let Mr. Dillon know that. And I'm like, get my serious voice. So she was like, oh, okay, yes. Let me make sure that's going to work for him and I'll call you back. And I was like, okay. So then she calls me back and she's like, Matt Dillon just doesn't know if he'll be able, or maybe she said Matt, I don't know. She's like, he doesn't know if they are going to be able to make it on time, so he'll just come in another time. But thank you so much for helping and all that. And I was like, oh, no problem. Like, I hope he comes back. We love to have him. Still not realizing it's Matt Dillon. So then, again, I'm standing there. And I'm like, and she didn't even say he was an actor. She wasn't like the actor, Matt Dillon. She was so sweet. So I'm standing there and I'm like, Matt Dillon. I'm like, why does that sound so familiar? And so my manager comes up again. She probably thought I was like the dumbest. She did like me. I don't know if she still likes me, but I love her. She was so sweet. She was so nice. But again, she was like, what's going on? Like, you look confused. And I was like, does the name Matt Dillon ring a bell to you? And she was like, Matt Dillon, the actor? And I was like, you think? And she was like, yeah, like, he's been coming in here. And I was like, oh my God. And so I tell her, and she was like, oh my gosh, you need to figure out who celebrities are. I was like, I know, this is so horrible. So, sorry, Matt Dillon, that you didn't get your cafe store co-fix that night. I know, it was good food, so I don't blame you for liking it. But I'm sorry, I'm so silly. And I didn't know your name. I did know your name, but it didn't resonate. Anyways. So then the second part of the Matt Dillon story is not in the restaurant, but nearby the restaurant. So two of my coworkers and I, we got off around the same time. And it was kind of early. So we're like, hey, let's go to this. The one friend was like, hey, let's go to this wine bar that's nearby. And like, they have like little plates and stuff that we can eat and have some wine and hang out. So we're like, yeah, cool, sounds great. So we go there and we're sitting up at the bar, and the restaurant was really small. So the bar was like in a square shape like this, and then they had seating around on the outside. So we've been sitting there, had a few drinks, or at least a drink already, like loosening up, feeling good, laughing, being silly, and in walks Matt Dillon with a date. And we're all like, oh my gosh, that's Matt Dillon. And he was so Matt Dillon. Like, he had, like, if I remember right, he had, like, a leather jacket on or something. Like, he just looked exactly like you think he would look like. He might have had a hat on, but he looked exactly like you would think so. So I'm like, oh my God, yes, that's Matt Dillon. And so we're like, oh my God. And he was on a date. Well, halfway through the date, so then we like chilled out, and we continued to laugh and have fun, and we were being really fun. So and maybe a little loud, but in a good way. I don't think people were annoyed. Halfway through dinner, Matt Dillon's date, or whoever he was with, she got up and left. Like, I don't even know if their food had come yet. It was really awkward. I'm sorry for you, Matt Dillon. I don't know what happened there, but maybe she was just a friend and had an emergency or something. But she left. So he like finished his food, and like out of the corner of my eye, I kept kind of looking over, and because we were being loud, he kept looking at us. So you could tell he wanted to come over and say hi, but I guess it's even awkward for celebrities to do that. So he starts to he pays his check, he gets up, and he kind of is like slowly walking out. And I'm a crazy person, so I'm like, hi. And he's like this, like, he turns around kind of slow, and he's like, well, hi. I don't know if he said, well, hi, or whatever. But he was like, oh, hi. And he's like, you guys look like you're having fun. And he immediately comes up to the bar and sits down. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So we're like, hi. And we're like, you come, we work over at Cafe Storico. You come at our restaurant quite a bit. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, what are your names? And so we're all like, Allison, and the other two people introduce themselves. And he's like, well, I'm Matt Dillon. And we're like, yeah, we know who you are. And so he sat there and chatted with us for quite a while. And then he was like, all right, well, you guys have a good night. It was nice talking to you. And he left. It was so cool. Like, he was just such a cool guy and very nice. And yeah, so it was a cool experience. Anyways. All right, so here is the big story. This is my favorite story to tell people. A lot of people I know have already heard this story, but it is such a fun story. Okay, there's lots of moving parts. So, again, I'm a hostess at Cafe Storico. There was nobody in the restaurant. It was, so between our, lunch and dinner, or, brunch and dinner, depending on what day it was, we would have a midday menu, and it was just, a tiny little menu. There wasn't a lot on it, but it was enough to, if you were hungry, you could figure out something on the menu. But it's an Italian restaurant, let me just say, okay? And not your typical Italian restaurant. It's fancy, nice Italian restaurant. So we don't have sandwiches on the menu, all right? That's important to know. So anyways, I'm standing there one day, kind of spacing off, whatever, thinking about, the meaning of life sort of shit. And nobody's in the restaurant because everyone's off doing their thing when the restaurant's not busy. So I'm standing there, and in walks this man from the museum. And I look at him, and he just looks like a regular guy. He's got tall white socks on. He's got some dad shorts on, t-shirt, just he might have had a little bit of a beard going, whatever. He comes in and he's standing there and I'm like, "Hi, how are you? Welcome to Cafe Storico." And as I start walking towards him, I start thinking to myself, and this all happens rapid in my head, thank God. Wow, this guy really looks like Tom Hanks. I'm going to tell him he looks like Tom Hanks. Holy shit, this is Tom Hanks. Now, I've never been starstruck. When Matt Dillon, I said hi to the man, Like, most of the time, I don't, like, when I've seen these celebrities and stuff, I'm like, oh, cool, that's that person. All right, like, they're just normal people. But Tom Hanks caught me off guard, and I was just in awe of him. I love his movies. I love his acting. He's one of my favorite actors. One of my favorite movies, top 5. Oh wait, he's not in that movie. Okay. Anyways, Sleepless in Seattle is definitely one of that's what I was thinking of when I was thinking of that. Anyways, love Sleepless in Seattle. Like, I am just a giant Tom Hanks fan. I just love him. So as I'm realizing in my head that I almost told Tom Hanks that he looks like Tom Hanks, I kind of just stopped working, and I think I had a mini stroke, and I'm just standing there like, and so Tom Hanks then is like, "Hi, do you serve some sandwiches or something here?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, you think I could maybe sit down and order something?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah. And he's like, and I'm not exaggerating, guys. This is how painful it was. And he was like, "Okay," and he starts kind of walking, and he's been through this before because he knew exactly what to do. So he's like, "Well, this looks like a nice table. Is it okay if I sit there?" I'm like, "Sure, yeah, I sit there, So he sits down, and I'm still just like, and he's like, "Do you have a menu?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, right." So now I finally snap out of it, and I turn around, and as I'm walking towards the host stand, I realize we're in our midday, we are an Italian restaurant, and we do not have sandwiches. So I'm looking at the menu and kind of praying that maybe sandwiches just like miraculously would show up on the menu so that I didn't just lie to Tom Hanks. And so I go and I hand him the tiny little menu. And I was like, "I think I told you that we have sandwiches. We don't actually have sandwiches here. But here's a menu. We have a lot of nice things like that I think you might find." And he was like, "Oh yeah, I just need a little something to eat. This looks great. Thank you so much." And I was like, "Oh my god, I just talked to Tom Hanks." So I'm standing there. Finally, a waiter comes up, or waitress. They're totally normal. No big deal, whatever. He orders his food, and then he goes to stand up. And I'm like, "Oh, whoa, where are you going?" And I saw that he had, like, the coat check little chip thing from the museum. And he was like, "Oh, I had something in coat check. I was just going to run and get it real quick." And I was like, "Don't you worry. I'll go get that for you." And he was like, "Well, thank you. That would be very nice. Thank you." In his very Tom Hanks sort of way. And I was like, "Oh my god, I'm getting Tom Hanks coat." And I think he said it's just one thing. He didn't tell me what it was yet. And so I was like, "Oh, okay, So I go and I get the coat, or I go and to get whatever the coat I thought I was getting, and I hand him the chip, and they hand me this typewriter. Tom Hanks just walks around with a typewriter. Do you guys know how fucking heavy typewriters are? They're extremely heavy. So I'm like, this is all that was with this number? And they're like, yeah, this is it. So I'm like, oh my God, I am holding Tom Hanks' typewriter. This is so incredible. And another backstory, I love typewriters, guys. I think they're so cool. I have one, but the ribbon's broken on it. Otherwise, it actually might work, but I've never, I love them. I think they're so cool. Anyways, always have had a thing for typewriters. Um, and so I just felt so honored to get to touch Tom Hanks' typewriter. I know that's so silly. But I come in and I'm like lugging it in because it is really heavy. And I wanted to tell him, like, I think it's so cool that you travel around with a typewriter. Like, I think it's awesome that you type things on it. Like, are you typing a screenplay or, you know what? And at this point, I was getting more interested into that world. So I'd already written some stuff on my own. So I just was like, oh my God, I want to tell him how cool I think this is. And I didn't because I'd already made a fool of myself. If you remember the beginning of the story, I didn't want to like freak the man out, you know? So I just asked him, like, this is all you had? And he's like, yep, that's it, you know? So he sat there, he finished his lunch, and he was like, all right, thank you so much. And he left. And I was like, oh man, I just kept going on all rest of the day. Like, how cool I thought that Tom Hanks writes on a typewriter. Like, you just don't see that, right? So now here comes the sad part of the story. This is the part, I want this story to go viral because I want Tom Hanks to hear this story. Because I don't know when I'm going to get an opportunity to meet the man. And I just, let me finish talking. So anyways, I then randomly read this article. And I don't know where I read the article. If it was in a magazine, a newspaper. I'm not sure where I read this article at. But it came across my something. And I'm reading it. And it's about this woman who was in Central Park or somewhere. We'll say it's Central Park. I don't know where she was at. But Tom Hanks was sitting on a bench with his typewriter, typing away. And she came up to him and she said, I think it's really cool that you use a typewriter. I love that you still do that. And like, it's a lost art sort of thing, whatever. And he said, why, that's really, you like typewriters? And she said, excuse me. And he said, you like typewriters? And she was like, yeah, you know, I think it's really neat. And he's like, well, here you are. He gave her his typewriter on the spot. On the spot, he gave her the typewriter. And she said exactly what I was thinking that day. And I was like, would Tom Hanks have given me the typewriter if I would have said something to him? And I was like, man, I regret that so much. So then, maybe a little while after that, I don't know how, like, this was all in the span of probably like 3 or 4 years. I think 3 years. I'm working in LA now. And I saw that there was this documentary came out. It's called California Typewriter. It's a great documentary. It's really cool. I saw Tom Hanks was in it, which didn't surprise me too much because I know the man walks around with a typewriter. So I'm like, yeah, I'm sure he knows stuff about typewriters. They had John Mayer in there and stuff too, and some famous author. And then they had like an artist who uses like old parts from typewriters, and then they had, you know, a family that owns a typewriting repair business. So it's actually a really cool documentary. So a friend and I told her I wanted to go see it, and she was like, I want to see that one too. So we made a point. So on the way there, I'm telling her about this Tom Hanks story because I think I knew he was in the movie. And she's like, oh, that is such a cool story, you know. So we're sitting there, and at one point in the documentary, Tom Hanks is like, yeah, I have like over 200 something typewriters. And then he said, anytime anybody that I meet that expresses even a little bit of interest in a typewriter, I give them a typewriter. And I write a little note typed when I give it to them saying, I hope you use this, and la-di-da-di-da. But the point is, anytime he hears somebody say they love typewriters, he gives them a typewriter. My friend looked at me and she was like, oh my God, you should have told him. I was like, I know. So life lesson, y'all. If there's something you want to say to somebody, it doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter the scenario, you're not going to get a chance again, right? Who cares? Tom Hanks remember me in that restaurant museum? I fucking hope not. I mean, that man meets people every single day, and I'm sure he gets that same reaction over and over and over again. There's no way he can remember every awkward, starstruck encounter he gets. Like, he's been famous forever. So, had I just said it, he might have given it to me. He might have. Or he might have been like, what's your address? I'll mail you one. He might not have. He might have thought I was a dope and been like, whatever. This girl's not going anywhere. I had to seat myself in this restaurant. But come on. Every day I think about that story. No, just kidding. But how cool would it be if Tom Hanks heard this story and sent me a typewriter? How cool would that be, guys? Anyways, that's my story. That's it. Those are my stories. Need to get a refill. Alright, so let's wrap it up, guys. Thank you for listening to my stories. I hope that you thought they were as funny as I think they are. I'm pretty embarrassing sometimes, but, you know, that's just me. So, what are you gonna do? Yeah, Tom Hanks, if you ever see this, I love you. You don't have to send me a typewriter, but it would be pretty cool if you did. Since you like giving them out so much, I would use it. I would actually use it. Anyways. Lesson is, guys, don't hold back. Yeah, you only live once. Who cares if you embarrass yourself? I already embarrassed myself. I might as well have gone the extra mile, you know? And he might not have given it to me, and that would have been totally fine too. But it's like, what if? You know, once you learn all this other stuff about the man, it's like, what if? So, yeah, I have other stories. Sorry, I'm like, it haunts me, guys. That story haunts me. I have some other stories of some celebrities, which maybe we'll get to another time. I don't really have that many more. Those are pretty much my big ones. But, yeah, we gotta save some stuff for later, right? Lots more The Bored Housewife episodes to come. Gonna need some content to talk about, because I'm only so interesting. So anyways, thank you so much, guys, for hanging out with me. Please comment. Please like. Please hit any little buttons down there that you would like, positive ones. Subscribe. Yeah, if you guys like the show, please be like, oh, I love this, you know, comment, because the more you guys comment, the more you like on stuff, the algorithms will start working in my favor. So then, you know, like YouTube or Apple or Spotify, whatever you're listening to this on, they'll be like, oh, you liked this, and so other people that have similar interests to you might also like this, you know. And so yeah, I'm trying, guys. I'm hustling here. So anyways, if you don't want to, that's totally fine. You don't have to. But I appreciate everybody who watches and listens. I love you guys. And yeah, I'm just happy to be doing this. It's pretty fun. You know, I get to drink and make a fool of myself for for everyone to listen and watch. No, anyways. All right. Thank you guys. Cheers. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and see you soon. Bye.